My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Altshuler. It's July 9th, 2025, and we're in Rhododendron near Mount Hood. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
First question, why wine?
So I moved to New Zealand when I was 18 years old. I went down there for a photojournalism internship that there was a miscommunication on my knowledge of experience and their expectations. That drifted, I was only supposed to be down there for 3 months, and then that drifted into me starting to work in hospitality in Wellington. Ended up down there for 2.5 years, very quickly shifting into silver service and fine dining. Kind of grew up in a house that focused on Epicurean orientation. Not necessarily a lot of cooking at home, but I've always had a rather fine taste for various types of food. So this kind of was a natural shift into working in nice restaurants and stuff. Wellington's got a really huge fine dining and Epicurean sort of culture. Started bartending, at age 18 and a half or so down there, because that's the nature of being overseas. And I came back to the US after about 3 years. So I was in New Zealand for a bit, then I went to Australia for another year. Was working in silver service there and for a catering company. And then packed up my stuff with my partner at the time, came back to the US in 2007, just in time for the 2008 collapse, and went through 5 hospitality jobs in about as many months, just because tips were really slow, and working at places where, in some cases going and working for 20 to 40 bucks a shift. And so I ended up tapping out of that, and by the end of 2008, or I guess the summer of 2008, I was driving an ice cream truck, and I was like, you know what, bugger this. I'm gonna sign up to go back to New Zealand. And the best pathway back after having already been there for 2.5 years was to go for education. So I signed up to go to winemaking school. At the time I'd become like really impassioned about biodynamics. And going to school in New Zealand, even with international student fees, because of the exchange rate at the time, and honestly right now, it's like 60 cents on the dollar. It's like less expensive for me to go to New Zealand and go to school than it was for me to go to Metropolitan, like Metro State University, like community college in Denver. So packed up my stuff, had no intention of returning to the US ever again. Went down there and did a 3-year program to get my bachelor's in viticulture and enology. Graduated with Lincoln University in 2011, and started working full-time viticulture in the summer and enology in the other portion of the season, with a lot of breaks in between. When I moved back to New Zealand is when I started writing music. It was just before I left. I had been set up from a friend of mine with a computer that had all the stuff needed for writing music. So as I was doing school, I was writing music in my procrastination time, and by the end of being down there, my only real way to stay in New Zealand was to commit to working for a large corporate facility. I could not bite down on that, so I decided to start doing double vintages and then using the shoulder seasons of the summers on both ends to be doing festival stuff. So I'd do New Zealand festival season, New Zealand vintage, jump a plane, come back home, see family for a few months, work in Oregon, so in 14 I worked for Ponzi. Same thing, back to Colorado, drop off my van, jump the plane, go to festivals for 3 months, go and work vintage for 3 months, come back, and I just basically did this on repeat until 17. During that course of time, I worked for Ponzi in 14, Grand Moraine in 16 or 15, and then Christum in 16. 17 came around. I was meant to go back to Australia and work for somebody down there. Visa stuff got all screwed up. My partner at the time was from Melbourne. The offer was on the table for me to go back down there, but I made the decision that a lot of childhood trauma that I had yet to deal with was long overdue to be taking the time to deal with it. And so I kind of put my foot down and was like, you know what, I just have to go through with this right now. And I stayed here, and that's when I got the permanent job with Southeast Wine Collective. Stayed in Portland for a little bit, or for a hot minute there. Worked with them through 20. In 19, I started Demeus. While I was still working with Tom and Kate down at down at Southeast Wine Collective. Really awesome opportunity at the time because they're running the collective as well as running division. So distribution for myself and for all the other members of the collective just made things really easy. The opportunity to engage in, come spring release, they would take 30 to 50 cases off of each person who was making wine inside the building and buckle that into spring release for everybody there. Just like really epic opportunity to be able to continue to grow and expand. And then come 20, Southeast had to move and pack up their stuff and basically become kind of a mobile operation on some level. And I had kind of reached the end of my rope because we're at the, back end of COVID. We had to move an entire winery, various formats of what happened because of furlough and so on and so forth. Just shifted a lot of the responsibility around, and also money's tight. And I guess because of my experience of working overseas and working in New Zealand and Australia, have seen a lot of skin contact booze. In 15, 16, when I was working at Napstein in South Australia, off the back end of having worked for Ponzi, I was actually ready to tap out. After seeing what was kind of going on inside of the American diaspora of the larger corporate structure and distribution networks, I really didn't want to engage any longer in the wine industry. And I was fortunate enough to go and work with some really epic people down there that are just absolutely mammoth characters inside of my story that showed me sticking to varietal typicity is not what's going to gain traction in any means. So after having worked in the Oregon scene for a while and seeing a lot of skin contact wine being put on what I would identify as the back foot, I decided that that's always been my passion since 15 as far as making wine. I started with making a skin contact Gewürz in 15 when I was down in Australia. And then pretty much every vintage I'd had after that, I would somehow weasel my way into getting either free fruit or free fruit. In 16, when I worked for Christum, they give everybody an opportunity to engage with a ton of Pinot Noir and let you have an experimentation. My partner and I were working with them at the time. We convinced them to give us Pinot Gris because we didn't really want to go down the road. And that was the first time that I made what became kind of the Demeus focal point, where I took a barrel, took the head off, put dry ice into it, destemmed all of the Pinot Gris that we got because they were about ready to rip the vines out or chip bud them to transition. Put all the destem in, put the head back on, put it on its side, and then we left. We got on a plane and we left to go and do another vintage overseas. When we came back and I saw the result, I was like, that's it. True minimal intervention, no sulfur use at all. And because of it being completely sealed up inside of a vessel, opportunity for spoilage is basically minimized to a degree that you very rarely are able to accomplish it in other ways. Extraction through the means of being on skins for that extended period of time creates a really, really astringent wine, but that also leads to something that has a tremendous amount of opportunity for growth of character as it ages. What I didn't foresee at the time was that making those wines as the forefront of your operation is a really challenging prospect, because what inadvertently you're doing is creating something that isn't going to be able to really sell or be particularly consumable for at least a 3-year period, if not 5 to 10 year period. And that's kind of where a lot of aside from the slew of other responsibilities inside of making wine that I am not proficient at, marketing, QuickBooks, general management of finances. Like when it comes down to it, I'm an awkward artist and a creative. My partner that signed up to do all this stuff is a tremendously talented business person. She has a winery out on the East Coast. And she was planning on really buckling into the whole thing with me. But the responsibilities of her family winery out in Maryland and me being all the way out here, it just didn't really align to be that way. So, needless to say, come 2020, kind of packed up my stuff, left Division to go it on my own. Tom and Kate wished me the absolute best, and in their words at the time, you got to give it your shot. And so I found a spot down in Amity with Keeler Estate. Ended up going down there and making wine with them for a couple of years before physically being removed by the universe from the industry. And here we are.
We'll get back to that in a minute, because I'm very curious about that. But let's talk about kind of the beginning of the path. You mentioned that going back into education, you thought about winemaking school. Why at the time was winemaking school in New Zealand the path you chose?
Well, I wanted to go back to New Zealand because I had no intention of wanting to live somewhere else. As I used to say to people that I was working with in hospitality at the time, I had become exhausted by the prospect of serving and by working as slave wage labor in order to accommodate a meal to somebody. I'm a creator, and so inevitably the only pathway forward for me in any industry is to be involved in creation. I think it's a baffling concept as a human being to be divine creation on some level and not be actively engaged in creating something. So as I mentioned before, biodynamics was really at the forefront of my desires at the time. And I've been pretty involved in biodynamic stuff in New Zealand, not necessarily directly working with a lot of biodynamic producers, but definitely being around it an awful lot. And that was really the goal. And honestly, in the long run, permaculture and biodynamic philosophies are kind of where the long-term target is. Whether or not that's involved in winemaking is kind of irrelevant to me at this point, just because from a permacultural standpoint, permaculture is not about any specific sort of production of item. It's really more about the all-inclusion of creating farming opportunities where different aspects of the area that you're farming all kind of feed into each other, right? You have cattle that are creating manure that's able to be used as fertilizer that may contribute towards wine or grapes or what have you, but it's also contributing towards your veggie garden. Now, veggie garden isn't just for you and your wife or your family, it's for you and all the people who work on the space. Arguably in the long run, the goal of being involved in like some sort of communal living situation is definitely a long-term tangent goal. And I mean, long before I got into wine, constructs around living in an earth ship or being a part of, off-grid living, hence this, right? It's not that I don't want to be around people, it's far from it. It's that I want to be around people who are being conscious about the way that we're consuming things and the way that we're also creating them. It's like a really strange diaspora in America to like everybody who lives up here, like there are very few people who grow their own food. It's a very strange thing. Whereas in New Zealand, like every house has a quarter-acre section. A quarter-acre section exists because that's what's been defined as what's required to raise a 4-person family. So I think it was just like, on one hand, maybe serendipitous, but on the other hand, the natural calling, because that was the education that I needed in order to be able to kind of reinforce the stream that I already had. And I definitely have, like, I tend to defer away from constructs of belief, being the absence of doubt, but I definitely have thorough faith, I guess, on some level, that we're all on certain paths that are guiding us towards whatever principle we're supposed to engage in or learn about along the way. Yeah, and that can lead us through all kinds of different things. I'm a tremendous fan of, I guess, have some sense of faith in the idea of generalized change. You know, as Octavia Butler would point out, God is change. You know, and so to embrace that and to understand that and to not allow the doldrums to completely take over your life when negative change transpires is like, it's a really powerful tool, and it's a really powerful experience to embrace change as it's happening, as opposed to kick your heels in and scream at the top of your lungs, why? You know? Yeah. But my mom was a sommelier right around the same time as I was working in hospitality. And I think that that's where a lot of that sort of ambition towards going to wine seemed to make a lot of sense.
So tell me about the education in enology and viticulture, and while you were receiving it, I'm curious about what were the parts of it that really spoke to you?
Well, I mean, so doing school down there, I went to a tech school for 2 years that had a carryover to Lincoln University. The Lincoln University program is 4 years long. With the program that I did, I was able to get a bachelor's in 3 years. The tech that I went with, they gave the opportunity for you to do vintage every year as well. So you're in school for longer, you get a shorter summer break, but the opportunity to perpetually do vintage every year, by the end of it, you graduate with 3 vintages under your belt, which is a really different circumstance to, say, UC Davis. You're in there for 4 years, and at the end of it, you have a bunch of book smarts, a big chip on your shoulder, and not a heck of a lot of understanding about how it's actually going down. And that just really appealed to me. Hands-on learning is really paramount to the way that I look at different things. I like viticulture from the standpoint of engaging in farming and understanding how soil nutrients work, and being able to have those conversations in the event that you're chatting with someone who's involved in viticulture, doing viticulture liaison work and things like that, which I've really only like dabbled with, but having the understanding is really paramount. I think it was a conversation that we had with a viticulturalist at one point that pointed out that another student, we're out there interviewing, and she asked, you know, why did you choose viticulture instead of choose winemaking? And his response was, well, I never wanted to be a janitor. And I am reasonably neurodivergent and a massive fan of OCD. Well, fan, I don't know, but my OCD is real. So being a janitor is not really a huge frustration to me. Tangentially, not long after that, the head winemaker at a winery in Marlborough called Mahi, Brian Bicknell, I believe, we were having a chat with him and talking about why he chose winemaking over viticulture, and he's kind of talking about how like the winemaking process is just this ongoing relationship with the product that you're engaging in, and that the big difference between winemaking and viticulture is that each year in viticulture you're growing this fruit, and it's this season from, you know, X to X, and then at the end of that, when it's all harvested, you get to take a big sigh and let things lie, at least for a minute, before you're back out there pruning, and here we go again. Whereas with wine, especially with carryover, you're kind of just in the mix in perpetuity. And admittedly, I guess from that standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense why I chose winemaking, because I love the shoulder aspect of winemaking. And in fact, like, my goals at this point of getting back into winemaking is very much vintage oriented. But I would also probably end up just doing the same winemaking processes that I ended up discovering through my own thing of put it all in a barrel, put a bung in it, and be like, hope you don't mind looking after this, so I could go overseas and go do the thing again. I love the light at the end of the tunnel. I love managing teams. I love crush. If I never had my own brand again, I could probably be okay with that. I really just love the big pump and the opportunity to do night shift and kill it, and then at the end of it, you know, sign off and go and do a whole bunch of festivals and then do it all over again. Yeah.
Speaking of that, let's take a pause from the wine for a moment and talk about the music part of your life. You mentioned starting to write music and having that be part of the annual part of your life there for a while. So tell us about the music path for you.
So yeah, like, I started writing at the same time as I basically started going to school, or just beforehand. This is at a time when there weren't a lot of online resources for how to do electronic music production. But I was fortunate enough going down to the South Pacific that some of the leaders of what was online and available, and especially in the regions of things that I'm super interested in, there are a couple of solid Ableton trainers, Ableton being the program that I use for production stuff at the time, and now. So kind of started getting into that, getting into festival culture, and in New Zealand it's obviously significantly smaller population base than here. Like, I got back from a festival this weekend where there's 6,000 to 7,000 people on a field, and I'm playing at the time in New Zealand every other weekend through the summertime at festival, 3 or 4 day long festivals with 200 to 300 people. So very different sort of genre type down there. Psytrance is the sort of oriented, party music through these 3 day festivals, as it were. I write sort of down-tempo experimental audio, kind of very broad structures after having a long life of, I've been in punk bands since I was a kid, I've played in cover bands when I was living in Blenheim, I enjoy everything from jazz to funk to death metal and, raised on Pink Floyd kind of vibes. I think overall, as far as an art form goes, the opportunity to create what's referred to as like concept albums, so telling a story over the course of 45 minutes, is really where it came from. In all perfect honesty, it comes from a place of wanting to have safe music to be able to play for people such as myself that like to enjoy rather heavy psychotropic experiences. So when I was just about to leave New Zealand, my partner and I, the first time, my partner and I went down to the top of the South Island, and that's kind of like when I became a hippie. There's this whole area in the top of the South Island called Golden Bay, and I got my first skirt that I still have, 20 years later, almost, yeah. We tripped some acid, and yeah, that was kind of the beginning of, wow. But as a result of that, engaging in, I guess, the psychedelic diaspora and discovering a lot of, like, not only how conceptual music from my childhood, like Pink Floyd and stuff like that, is so heavily involved. It wasn't a matter of, like, suddenly becoming some wild psychonaut so much as discovering that the level of spirituality that can be engaged in and can be discovered through appropriate consumption is an opportunity to I guess discover something I was very familiar with from my childhood. I grew up in evangelism. I used to speak in tongues and a lot of heavy-handed prayer. And like, your brain on God is a really unique and odd circumstance to investigate. And then, as George Carlin would say, upon the age of reason, my grandfather passed away. I was living with my grandparents growing up, and when he passed away when I was 17, a lot of my faith in the church kind of went with him. And it wasn't until discovering psychedelics that I really came back to the table on a certain level. And that admittedly has guided a lot of my path since then. That's kind of why the music thing is such a paramount opportunity. I would say at this stage, writing music and playing music with other people, the engagement with other folks, like, that has become my psychedelic, and that has become my God on some level. Which is inherent given the fact that your brain on music is endorphin release, is dopamine release, it is all these different things psychologically happening for you as the individual. And then to be engaged in an opportunity where, like, a few years ago, I guess more than that now, almost like 8 to 10 years ago, I started getting messages from people in war-torn countries, like throughout the Eastern Bloc, that are like in the middle of some pretty crazy stuff, sending me messages on SoundCloud going like, your music is providing me a sense of solace. And that was a hint that I should have taken at the time, that I didn't, but it definitely urged me forward to continue writing. Obviously needing to work a job, and then certainly starting a brand started detracting from writing music. And in all perfect honesty, I think that's kind of why the accident happened. Again, as I said before, belief is a really dangerous word to me, but in the name of faith that things are happening for a good reason, I think that the accident happening in 22 was the universe, as it were, kind of stepping up and being like, yo, dude, like, you are way off the targeted path here. And I needed a break, literally, to be kind of forced back into the place where I am now, where what I'm doing up here is, working on studio stuff. I'm deeply involved in education. Started going back to school with Berklee School of Music, learning about mixing and mastering, spending anywhere between $1,700 up to $3,500 per class to gain these really heavy-handed pieces of information. Then I turn around and I go and teach for a not-for-profit down in Portland, as well as do online sliding scale education for mentorship with other producers in their 20s who are coming up, and kind of all turned into a situation where I wanted to be able to provide the knowledge I felt like a lot of people had gatekept from me when I was coming up. And I had the curiosity, but I didn't have the right questions in order to be given the knowledge that I think would have hastened my learning. And I want to serve that on a platter in the right way to people who I know are in the same position, that they want to know. They maybe don't know what to ask, and I just want to shortcut it because I don't see the value in trying to hold on to a piece of information that is supposedly giving you some sense of traction. I think it's a really obnoxious philosophy that we see everywhere. We see it in winemaking, we see it in music making, we see it in all these things, especially inside of identity politic cultures like America, where there's so much basis and focus on individualism, and so little focus on how much we can all gain simultaneously from sharing information simultaneously in order to lift each other up. And that inevitably was kind of part of my push away from the Oregon scene. Even before the accident, I was already growing bitter with the whole thing. The general nature of like everything being owner operated in Oregon, it creates a really awkward diaspora for the way that people interact with each other. A lot of smile in your face, but all the time they want to take your place. And like, I just can't get behind that. You know, don't get me wrong, there's some great nuts out there. There's some really good folks that are making cool stuff. You know, Eric from Ricochet is a prime example, or, you know, Alex Neely with Libertine. You know, like, these guys are slaying. Isabel from down at Dacha, or like Jess, you know, kicking ass. Like, these folks are all doing really cool things, but the tiny guy is often getting stomped out by people who have the money for marketing or have the money for, you know, having a team. And it's a really unique and kind of odd comparison, but it's something like working in New Zealand and Australia. You don't see it to the same degree, oddly enough, because when you're working inside of an industry, let's take Marlboro for instance, where everything is owned by a corporate, all of the head winemakers of those corporates are not the owner-operators of the business. And so the communal standpoint of one winemaker from a large corporate and another winemaker from a large corporate getting together to say, hey, can I borrow your XYZ today, is super common, because they have a vested interest as the result of just being community members of where they live. They are not the CEO who lives 500 miles away or even further by some Chinese subsidiary that's like really far away, right? Like, they're on a paycheck. But here, you know, the result of everybody being owner-operator, there's a rub that's just kind of perpetually happening. You see a little bit of stuff here and there where people are interacting in a really positive way, but I feel like it's kind of few and far between, especially through the Willamette Valley. Honestly, it's something that I only recently discovered, but driving back from being up in the gorge this weekend, I came through and I discovered all these wineries that exist just on the other side of Hood River. And I'm sitting there going like, oh, because you can feel it. Without even stepping into one of those wineries, you can feel from a mile away, like, these are the little guys. That, you know, these guys probably do have the opportunity to go, hey, can I borrow your filter this weekend? And like, I don't know, I'm inclined. You know, the curiosity is growing again, so.
So before we get to sort of the stamp at the end of the wine, tell me about the beginning. Tell me about sort of initial work in vintage and harvest. What were your impressions of working in the wine industry and working in the cellar? What did you enjoy about it?
So I've always been a night shift nerd. I like working when there's less supervision. By and large, I am a loud, obnoxious, depending on who I'm working with, ray of sunshine or fresh air, or depending on who I'm working with, wildly irritating and frustrating to be around. When people are under a lot of stress, I'm probably not the best person to be around during vintage because I like to scream and holler a lot. But night shift has always been something that I've adored, and I've been in it since the very beginning. I like the opportunity to be able to have some self-guidance, but also I like the opportunity to be able to step in and help anybody. I'm a big observer. I'm kind of perpetually looking around and seeing what's going on, perpetually running over to say, wait, don't squish yourself right now. Yeah, from the beginning, I worked for Framingham, which is hands down like some of the most foundational sort of mentors that I've had along the way. The entire team there, the Andrews that were the winemakers when I was working there. It's a Riesling house in Marlboro, and that's just tremendously foundational to my love of Riesling down the road. I've always been a fan of it in the first place, but working with them and seeing their processes, understanding like the attention to detail and also the attention to a lot of variability, which is really paramount. Andrew Headley, the head winemaker at the time, would engage in not just multiple treatments of the way that he would bring fruit in, but he would also take more passes than I've ever seen in any conventional or like Western sort of philosophy of the Riesling out there, and like making everything from dry Riesling taken in as early as possible all the way to Trockenbeer and Auslese. So depending on the year, like we're talking, he's taken like 7 or 8 passes out of the vineyard annually. Highly laborious, very attention to detail focused, and like I really love that. I've worked for larger corporations where I'm basically just running teams and crushing fruit, or oftentimes working in red processing where you're just managing teams through punch down maneuvers and what have you. And some of the larger facilities down there, everything's very divided. You're not involved in making whites and reds and whatever at the same time. It's like you're either on red team or you're on white team. But even in places where I've worked where I'm crushing 20 tons of Sauvignon Blanc an hour, the opportunity to figure out what the correct like format of mechanization is, how to isolate your time, how to turn, and then taking those talents from working in a really large place where I'm managing teams to running night shift effectively by myself on some occasions at Southeast Wine Collective, learning how to like turn yourself into the team. How do I like manage this list of things that needs to be accomplished, and then create the systems of what would be like an operation line, but of you as the individual. Just really tremendous thing to engage in. So yeah, the initial impressions of it were, I don't want to walk around in a vineyard for 8 hours a day, weed whacking stuff and spraying things. I want to be running on my feet, listening to loud music and scrubbing things. 'Cause I did vineyard work in the summer times as well. Like when I was doing school, you'd do vintage and then you'd have the break, but during the summer you work in a vineyard. And like, I did it. It's not really my jam. Yeah. It's a lot, in my experience, it's just a much slower paced experience. I'm kind of, go when the opportunity is right. I think that a lot of that, honestly, it stems from the hospitality diaspora, right? Like working hospitality and serving and bartending, when it's busy, you're busy. When it's slow, it's slow. Like I'm very much of a fan of the roller coaster of the experience, Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier starting your own brand and focusing on sort of skin contact whites in a very unique way. So tell me about kind of getting into it and the first couple of wines you made. What was exciting to you about having your own wine in barrel, in bottle?
Honestly, so the first wine that I made was in South Australia. I got a whole bunch of overripe Gewürztraminer, and I made a 17% on-skin Gewürz that the place where I was working at, they also had a brewery on site. So I got a whole bunch of free brewery glass, which was pretty appropriate given that what I'd made was 70% skin contact Gewürz. And the only downside of putting high percentage Gewürz into a beer bottle is that the aesthetic of it being in a beer bottle makes you think like, oh, it's just a single drink. And then, I'd have friends over, we'd get through 3 of them and wake up the next morning like, wow, that is very potent. But I think honestly, like what led to the starting of my own brand was, like I said before, I just observed skin contact wine being this thing that was kind of just being made in Oregon by not everybody, but by a lot of folks as like, oh, this is hot right now, let's make it to contribute to the market because trying to gain some traction with it. But like my idols are Radicon, or like the first like skin contact I had outside of Australia was like Pheasant's Tears out of Georgia, and like looking at those sorts of wines, especially looking at Radicon, which is really what a lot of the sort of basis of Demeus was based around. These are very intense and like thought about wines. Gravner and the teams that are out there in northern Italy that are doing this, they're making this booze and have no intention of releasing some of it for 4 years to the public. And it's meant to stand that test of time. And as much as it may not be a particularly profitable way of engaging in creating something, I find it far more interesting and at least fulfilling to engage in the art for the sake of the art than to just start chasing something that is going to be easily sold. And honestly, I just never wanted to make a porch pounder. You know, I've had my own experiences with alcoholism. I didn't really want to contribute to it. And if you make a wine that's been left on skins for 413 days, turns out you can't really pound it on a porch. I mean, you can, but like it's aggressive. So by the time I got around to making my own stuff full time here in Oregon, I was pretty deep into occultism. And that's kind of where the basis of how the whole recipe, as it were, started. You know, take a barrel, remove a head, 100% destem to barrel, but prior to putting any fruit in, you put a bunch of dry ice into the barrel, put some quartz crystal into the barrel, and then slot shovel from pick bin to barrel before putting the head back in. As Steve Dorner would point out the first time he saw me doing it at Christum, he's like, I hope you're charging a lot for that. That is a lot of time. But yeah, I don't know. The function of being able to make a living out of it may not have succeeded, but the function of being able to understand how to accomplish it, I would say worth every penny. And definitely, you know, as much as I'm not doing it right now, the opportunity to understand the process, knowing how to ride that bicycle is not going anywhere, you know. Admittedly, it's such a minimal task. How could you forget it? But then simultaneously, it's so obnoxious to do that nobody's going to copy it. And it's dicey. In all perfect honesty, it's a really dicey maneuver. And an 8-barrel batch of the 413 days on skins, the last time I did it, 6 of the barrels made it. The other 2, you just have to cut your losses unless you want to deal with a VA that's so out of control that the entire batch is going to be toast. But yeah, that's the experiment, you know. I think it's kind of interesting, like by comparison to, let's say, you know, making wine in New Zealand, or even making wine for, like with KJW, where commercial yeast can be involved, or you know, systems of, you know, Christum, like Steve Dorner's processes for creating consistency throughout the wine profile is like really amazing and super unique to engage in. I'm not so sure how much of that information I can dispel, but targeted pHs and targeted, you know, obvious Brix income and or intake, and making sure that all these things are kind of set at the beginning of the ferment is a really unique way of engaging by comparison to where I ended up, which is kind of like, what have I got? Okay, is that all right? Yep, that's close enough. Let's put it in and see what happens. And if you have the opportunity to take it in multiple passes and then do multiple stages, because I worked in cocktail bartending for so long, the idea of having multiple ingredients at the end for blending components is like a really huge thing for me in the way that I embrace just engaging in it in general.
Why Demeus?
Because my name is Alexander Nicodemus Altshuler, and I was gonna name the brand Demeus, and then I was driving to work one day, and Rock Me Amadeus came on the radio, and I was like, Demeus is way cooler than Demus. So yeah, Demeus, which inadvertently most people pronounce as Demus anyways.
So once you had wine in bottle, I'm your own wine in bottle. How did you find people who were interested in it?
Southeast. At the time, Southeast was still distributing all of the clients' booze. And they honestly gave me the hugest leg up that even to this day, a lot of the folks that I have who are interested in what I'm doing, it's mostly because of the way that they helped go through that. And I can't thank Tom and Kate enough for all of that. I've never really met any of them, but I've heard whispers along the way that, like, I'm not very well liked by a lot of the WVWA community. The circumstances of this huge focus and I get it, like, a lot of money's been spent on trying to embrace Pinot Noir and really push the affidavit, as it were, into Pinot Noir being the thing for tourism to come and embrace. They're not a huge fan of what us city slickers are up to, making all kinds of weird booze because nobody wants to bite down on $5,000 a ton of Pinot, at least not at every corner. Yeah, in the city, you get enough of the weirdos. On top of it, I'm making wine that's got septograms and various occultic sort of nods happening on the label. Yeah, like a lot of the events that I would be pouring at are like late night witch gatherings and what have you. Ceremonial wine is kind of where I started really pushing it towards the end, and that's where a lot of it ended up. And I mean, admittedly, it falls directly in line with what the goal was in the sense of not wanting to make porch pounders. Problem is witches don't have any money. So like, you're trying to push booze out the door at $45 a bottle because I've meditated on it for 400 and something days while it's got crystals in it, and like, the idea is brilliant, but like, they're getting ready to spend $40 on an Aleister Crowley book. They're not doing it for for the next bottle of wine that they're dumping down for some ceremonial, like, black magic of some description. So that, in tandem with, as I'm sure y'all know, and all of us are, I feel it for a lot of the folks who are still in the game. The alcohol industry is on the down. Be it because of WHO, be it because of circumstances with regard to people just becoming aware of how incredibly unhealthy it is to be drinking all the time. The net of selling large amounts of volume that at a low cost is definitely on the slip out right now. And like, I'm still very well tapped into what's going on with that, as my partner in Maryland is like part of a massive juice factory that's pushing a whole bunch of stuff out the door, that has really built their brand over 3 generations. They've got a lot of stuff that's, between the $10 to $15 mark. And then they also have a separate side brand that's pushing stuff that's in the higher range of 30 plus. Like, as we're seeing this shift, people are willing to spend more money on a finer product, but certainly not as frequently. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting watching it all kind of shift and change. And then simultaneously, for the sort of American capitalist nature of it, I can only imagine how challenging it is for everybody who's really built these base brands off of like, okay, well, we make this handful of items that are of a finer, higher price point and what have you, but the bulk of our sales at this lower price point is what's really making us, make ends meet. And at the end of the day, I think that that's, another contributing factor to not just me having, not a contributing factor to me having the injury, but certainly a contributing factor to me not really rushing to get back into the game after the injury, is that I've begun to see the same thing here as what I kind of grew a distaste for in New Zealand, which is large format 20,000 ton factories that are making Sauvignon Blanc and pushing it out the door at $5 a bottle in order to get into export market. This is a race to the bottom. Like, what's in there? Like, what are all the additives that are going into it to make it like taste consistent? As someone who's relatively focused on health, I don't think it's really great to be ingesting tremendous amounts of sulfur and copper and non-indigenous yeast is negligible as to what sort of negative health impacts are there. But certainly just alcohol in and of itself. We know what it does to your metabolism. We know what it does to your mind. Melissa, my partner in Maryland, and I often joke about, even in the shittest vintage that you're experiencing where everything's going awry, well, you're not saving lives. In fact, you're actively assisting in ending them. And so that in tandem with the race to the bottom circumstance is just kind of, I guess, disenchanting on some level. I think if I was part of a scheme where there was a lot more art being made, then I would be far more interested in the engagement of perpetuating with it,
So you talk about sort of leaving Southeast, chasing this, and ending up at Keeler. Tell me about working there and about how you left the industry.
So going down there at the start, it was a cowboy operation. Craig had kind of built that off the bones of what he had made through his business with Amco. The net of the reality as far as like the functionality of the space is really challenging. Just given when you're working inside of a shared workspace with a lot of different makers that have a lot of different levels of experience, there can be a tangential aspect of it's like a lot of, maybe not competition, but a rub as far as like, by the time I'd got there, I've got over 13 years of experience in the industry as far as operating a pallet jack, and I'm working next to somebody who's like, mom just bought them a Tesla and they have no idea how to even operate the next like press cycle. I have no problem with engaging with helping people out and what have you, but under the pump and under the circumstances of like really needing to get your own project through, or other people who you can see are passionate about engaging in it, can just create a lot of challenges with the diaspora. The first year was really great. There was a lot of opportunity for engagement. Myself and Jess Miller with Little Crow, we were both camping on the site, which is a super unique experience. So I've got a van with a bed in the back of it. She was able to set up a tent at the vineyard, and we had a blast. And really got to know each other, got to operate at nighttime, and make our stuff. Kind of keep to ourselves to a certain degree, but also engage with other people along the way and help out as needed. And then through the following summer, I had mentioned before that in 2017, when I was meant to go back to Australia, I had the opportunity to go back and be with my partner at the time. She was willing to marry me and bring me back to Aussie, and that's when I decided I needed to deal with a bunch of stuff that I felt like I'd been running from. And in the summer of 22, I kind of went into a bit of a downward spiral of engaging in a lot of this stuff, confronting my biological father, who I'd never known, the guy that I call my dad, that some weird circumstances had taken place in my youth, and just kind of trying to confront a lot of these different bits and pieces that led to a really overt and tremendous amount of alcohol consumption that, in all perfect honesty, I'd already been kind of excessively engaged in. The second year came around, and there's just a lot to manage for Ben. He was the head winemaker that had been brought on. Keeler had been going through a few winemakers over the years. And there's a lot to manage, especially just given that there's a family member who's also making wine inside the building. And given that sort of sense of belonging, I suppose, the building realistically just wasn't built to handle the volume that was being brought in. It's not that the building couldn't handle the volume in and of itself. but the building most certainly couldn't handle the volume being brought in the fashion it was being brought in. You want to bring in 200 tons of fruit into a building of that size, you can't do it inside of a whole bunch of 1.5 ton amphoras. You got to bite down on getting some 10,000 liter tanks. You got to change some recipes about what's going on. And like, I know that what I do is space consumptive, but I also know that how to do what I do in a way that isn't space consumptive. That's also one of the reasons why I stuck with the wine in barrel with all the crystals locked in, because I can stack. I can keep it to tight footprint. But you come in the middle of the night to process your fruit, and there was literally nowhere for me to drive a forklift. I started getting a little bit irate. And I was already dealing pretty neck deep with a whole bunch of emotional baggage. And I was admittedly drinking a lot. And I would come in, and I had my fruit come in right around Halloween. I wasn't able to process my fruit that vintage for 10 days. I had to let it sit in a cold storage that was in a cooler out the back. And I came down on 3 separate occasions prior to finally being able to process everything one night. And I got through it, processed all of it by myself. And at the end of it, as I'd been processing, I noticed that the floor out on the processing area had not been being cleaned during it, because I wasn't the only member of contract winemaking at the time that had grown disenchanted by the circumstances. So I kind of get it, but I, having again been working in sterile environments for a long time, could not handle what I was looking at. And so I think I'd come in at about midnight or so, let the other people finish up what they were doing. I started processing about 2 a.m. I finished up processing at about 10 in the morning. And then I was disgusted by the state of the floor. And so I decided I was going to pressure wash the floor to get it back to a state of comfortability. This admittedly goes back to one of my big pushes about working night shift over the many years that I'd been doing it in other places was night shift crew does it better than you. And so I wanted to basically have people come in and see this place that had been left in an immaculate state, so that I could turn around and be like, see, it's not that hard. But inevitably that's, that's a rude way to look at the entire thing. That's not remotely as communal or contributory, I suppose, as much as a bit of a fuck you statement. But at the time I was bitter, I was angry. I also at this stage was like very neck deep in Satanism, and I'm sure that whoever's listening to this will have a mass misconstruction as to what that means, but that's for you to discover. No, I was not sitting there idolizing a figure called Satan, but I would come in and do, throughout my ferments, I would draw large sigils on the ground, set up candles, sit and meditate in front of my ferments and what have you. This made other members of the winery either find it very funny or, for the most part, rather uncomfortable. And I am terribly amused by discomfort. So needless to say, I decided that I was going to clean up this floor. I needed to move a destemmer that was not on industry grade platform. It had been a build that I don't know if Craig had done it, but someone who was part of the Keeler team had built the actual frame that the destemmer was sitting on, and it was on 3-inch casters. And I was pushing it away from me onto the rest of the deck where they'd been driving tractors through, so there's rocks everywhere. And I ran to the other side of it to pull it towards myself, and it hit a rock, and like a skateboard hitting a rock, it stopped in its tracks and came tipping towards me, and I reached up to push it out of the way, and then I realized very quickly, oh shit, Alex, get the fuck out of the way. And so I ran underneath it, and it got me from behind. And So fortunately, it just got me from behind down in my lower extremities, but blew my right tib fib out the front of my leg. Fortunately, it was noon at this point and other staff members had arrived. Alex Clark, who is a volunteer EMT, had just gotten in, and he was coming down from the upper barrel hall, saw me. It was about 2 minutes, if that, after it had happened. The look on his face was utter horror. I looked at him and I said, "Hey, Alex," and he said, "Yes." I was like, "Can you do me a favor?" He's like, "Yeah, what's up?" I was like, "Can you get this off of me?" And he's like, "Absolutely." And he comes running over and he lifts up the destemmer on the back end. I think I said, "Can you get this off of me? I'm pretty sure I've broken my leg." And he lifts it up and I pulled my leg out and rolled over. I said, "Can you do me another favor?" And he's like, "What's that?" And I said, "Can you get my phone?" He's like, "Yep, no worries. Where is it?" "It's over there. It's in my pocket." And he ran over and grabbed my phone. I called my partner in Maryland. I called my mom, and then it went dark. And I came to with a large number of emergency medical people surrounding me with one of those sniffer things to wake you up. And yeah, they chucked me into the back of the ambulance, and that was the beginning of the next the next leg of the journey. So got up to Willamette Valley Medical Center. That stage, by the time they'd had me around for a minute, they made an attempt to reset my leg for the time being, at least so it wasn't so, I mean, I was outside of my body. So they made an attempt to reset my leg. I classically, because they were like, "This is going to be pretty gnarly," I was like, "Hold on a second. Can I sing a song?" They're like, "Yeah, you can sing a song." And so I sang "Give Me a Break," the Kit Kat song, while they reset my leg. Jess Miller was sat by my side or stood by my side holding my hand through this whole procedure. And I classically recall, "Give me a break, give me a break, break me off a piece of as they reset me. Sorry, I'm sure that's overdriving the signal. Yeah. Everybody in the room is just laughing because they're like, "What the fuck is this guy?" And they couldn't take care of me because they needed a vein specialist, and that person was not around. So they packed me up, sent me in another ambulance up to OHSU. And I'm extremely thankful because OHSU did a tremendous job. Super wild experience. Got up to OHSU that night. I think it was Friday night. So they're dealing with Friday night emergencies. We can't do anything for you until tomorrow. Following day in the morning, I can't remember what time, they got me in. When you compound fracture your tib fib, or your tibia most specifically, I guess, the way they take care of it is they cut you open at the top of the knee, they pull your leg forward, and then they use a drill press with this pretty large auger on it to drill all the way through, down to through the entire center of the bone. And they put just one pin straight down, and they screw you at the top and screw you at the bottom. And that afternoon, 45 minutes after I was out of surgery, they had me out walking. I wasn't able to walk per se, but they have you on your feet as quickly as possible to try to get that happening again. Unfortunately, because my bones had been outside of my body in a puddle full of grape mark and gross stuff, I ended up going into sepsis, but they didn't share any of that with me while it was happening. I just had this wound that wouldn't stop. It was the gift that kept on giving. And so when you're dealing with infection at the same time as a really nasty bone fracture, you have to prioritize the way that those things are taken care of. And heavy-handed antibiotics are inhibitory towards bone growth. So bone growth is the most primary thing that needs to be taken care of. Infection is dealt with after the fact. So for months, they just basically kept telling me, oh, you know, just let it keep oozing, just make sure you clean it, it's fine, you know. But in reality, now I know retrospectively, they're going, we need to keep an eye on this, but they don't tell you that as a patient, because that's no good. I had Kaiser Permanente insurance, but I was treated by OHSU, so I've got multiple medical teams helping me. My checkups happening with Kaiser, in between, my PT happening with Kaiser, but my actual checkups with the bone doctor and with the person who did the surgery and everything is all still with OHSU. So I'm being told by OHSU, leave it alone and let it drain. And then I'm being observed by a nurse practitioner at KP saying, this doesn't look right. And I have a lot of medical family, and they also felt like it didn't look right. And so upon going and visiting with my nurse practitioner one day and identifying that I had family members concerned about the oozing, he turned around and decided it was time to put some collagen in the hole. Collagen, well, you pack it out, and then that should basically help the skin seal up. What was not being thought through was that by doing so, that did not mean that the infection was gone. Sure enough, it did seal me up. Unfortunately, if you have an infection that's continuing, it needs to find a way out. And so maybe a week or two after I'd been sealed up with collagen, I started noticing a pretty large bump growing on my knee. And it started looking pretty gnarly, like I'd had a spider bite or something, with a big old white head on it. And so I contacted OHSU to say, like, hey, I need to, I think I need to come see you guys. They're like, what's going on? And I told them, they're like, yeah, you need to come in here. Let's see if we can get you in tomorrow. Yep, come on in. And went in, and they're like, okay, yep, you definitely needed to come in. And what had happened was, because the collagen had sealed off my leg, but the bone fracture still existed, the infection, because it didn't have its outward down at where the break was, it ran the length of the actual rod in my leg, and then where the screw posts are at the top, that's where it decided to exit. And it was coming out of my leg. And after I left that meeting on the Tuesday, I got into my car, and I literally got into the car. As I was getting into the car and my clothes rubbed against the side of it, the whole thing just exploded and started running down my leg. And so I jump in the car. I'm feeling pretty down and out about the experience. I'm alone. I'm going home alone. I remember calling Melissa out in Maryland and just telling her what was going on, and that I was going back under the knife in 2 days. They needed to take all my hardware out, do surgery, and then put a temporary antibacterial rod in. What that is instead of a titanium rod, it's another rod that's made out of basically a antibiotic cement that is slow releasing antibiotics into the area. And put that in, and then a few months later after that, I have to go under the knife again to have everything taken out, because you don't want to leave a porous rod inside your leg in the event that maybe someday down the road something else happens. You want to let your body fill it back in. But yeah, by the end of all of it, I am all me now. I have no hardware. Just a cool story to tell, and admittedly, like a big piece of advisory for, I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about that, I don't know if there's a question for it or what have you, but I know I am far from the only alcoholic in this industry. I know that I am far from the only person involved in substance abuse in this industry. We didn't get here because we were all teetotalers, right? Not everybody is, necessarily has the same stories of maybe childhood abuse or something like that landed us to this situation, but I also know that just in general, the American diaspora is full of traumatic circumstances, be it children or adults or what have you. The society is full of, yeah, sure, they may be first world problems, but they're still problems. And I think that the huge blessing that I have to be able to sit before you today is the fact that, at least on this timeline, I'm still here, and to be able to not just share this story with you, but to continue to support people that I know who are still dealing with alcoholism, and to help share what's happened to me and encourage them to get away from alcoholism, because I don't want to see them pinned down by a distemper in the middle of the night. And certainly, I admittedly at the time, alcoholism's a twisted one, because you can be over the limit, but if you've been drinking like that for months, you feel like you're just fine. I don't blame the alcohol for what happened as much as I blame the anger. I was so angry about circumstances that admittedly were in my control. If I had spent more time in the winery like I had the previous vintage, contributing to everybody's stuff and really helping out, I probably wouldn't have been in that situation. I'd become lackadaisical and consumed by my own dealing with traumatic stuff from my childhood. And I think a lot about these days with the levels of distraction that are perpetually surrounding us, devoiding us away from the actual ends, means, and goals we're trying to accomplish. It's awkward, because on some hand, the 16-year-old version of me would be horrified to say that I'm not fully engaged in trying to fix the mediocrity of, I don't know, the police system or something like that. But the older I get, the more I think about the fact that through the active engagement and paying attention to the things that are truly meaningful to what I want to accomplish, if I do those things, I'll be more capable of engaging and using the finances that I get from it, or the connections that I have from it, or the fulfillment that I have from those things, in order to contribute towards a better day for other things that I am passionate about, be it houselessness, or be it community service, or all those other aspects, and social welfare, as opposed to just general angst towards the system, and then trying to use disassociative tactics in order to facilitate some sense of well-being for a very short period of time. I guess all that's to be said. I'd thought a lot. It's been a long time since we've been talking about doing this, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to hold back, was because if we had done it right off the back end of it, I would have had a lot of negative things to say, and probably not been able to take remotely as much responsibility for my own actions and acknowledge that I directly contributed towards how this happened. But I also do genuinely believe, as much as I remain an open-minded skeptic about things, given this beautiful environment we sit before now, that this is where I'm supposed to be. It was supposed to be this way. It's been a hard road. It still is a hard road. But it doesn't change the fact that the world and the life around you is going to perpetually be offering distraction, distraction, distraction. And it's up to you as the individual to make the decision. Am I going to stick to the thing that's actually providing not just solace for myself, but solace for the people around me? For that guy that hit me up 10 years ago, and I don't even remember it was in the Eastern Bloc, who was in the middle of a war-torn experience, to say, thank you for writing this music, because it's giving me solace in a really challenging time in my life. That's meaningful. That's life-lasting. Even if it's only just for one person, that's so huge. And I don't know, that's the target,
So how do you find yourself here in this particular place?
I just got done with Portland. I don't fit in very well in Portland. I'm a huge fan of debate. I'm a tremendous fan of knowledge and education, and I find the general myopic nature of people actively contributing towards the neoliberal agenda without even acknowledging that that's what they're doing. Modern neo-feminism that embraces the concepts of supposed egalitarianism while simultaneously diminishing the value of other people because they don't agree with the specific subsets of individualism. I think it's really dangerous. I think for a place that's supposed to be so highly oriented towards the circumstances of embracing everybody for being individuals and for having a lot of different individual pathways, it certainly seems to be an awful lot full of hypocrisy and an inherent demand for subscription to quote unquote my truth. I think that to subscribe to those things is playing directly into the hands of the powers that be that are actively trying to diminish our society in order to facilitate a sense of control. And I honestly just got fed up with poor excuses for not showing up by people who I've grown close to over the years. I don't know. I'm a big advocate for supporting my friends and for being there for people whenever anybody needs something. But over the last year, I've gone through a really tremendous amount of my own need. I guess especially after living in New Zealand for so long, I don't see the sense of community in this country that I've seen in other places. Be it because of identity politics or just be it because, I mean, you can ask darn near anybody that I've grown close to over the way. I'm weird. The number of times I've had people tell me, I get one of two perspectives. You are one of the most interesting people I have ever met in my entire life, or you are fucking weird and I don't like you. But my entire life, you either love it or you hate it. And then in many cases, you love it and then you hate it. And I'm okay with that. So fuck that. I'm gonna go move off to 4.5 acres in a neighborhood that has 7 permanent residents and a 10-acre radius. And we be chilling. We be chilling, we be making music, and I'm doing mentorship with kids across the nation. I'm planning on setting up an audio camp up here. Doing, like I said before, work with a not-for-profit down in Portland, doing sliding scale education for disadvantaged youth to teach them how to do all these things that I'm learning about. They're clapping. And when the cicadas or whatever the heck those are that are chiming in, I tend to get a minor acknowledgement from wherever I'm at. That's yeah, that's what's up, you know.
A lot of amens coming from you there, behind you there.
Yeah, heart out. Yeah. So, I don't know.
If you did wine again, what would you want to do?
I would want to do more of the same. Right now, I've got my eyes set on getting out of here and getting up to Canada when some other life circumstances shift around. There's a winery up there that I've been told about since I came back to the U.S. in 2017. In the Okanagan, that they ferment and barrel store their wines in pyramid-shaped structures with quartz crystal floating all through the pyramid structure. And that sounds like my cup of tea. I've looked at the website. Those guys look like my archetype. Like, we all kind of have the same sort of like curly hair, glasses, kind of weird. Like, yeah, there's probably, you know, occasional mushroom experiences happening on the weekend. Yeah, but it's like fully biodynamic, the whole 9 yards, and real biodynamics. Not we're ordering everything from some East Coast, you know, Demeter certified, so on and so forth. Real permaculture on site, feeding the people that are working there, like woofing and workers on organic farms kind of stuff. You know, there's not a heck of a lot of it happening here. It's floating around a bit. Christum's up to some really great stuff. Brooks is up to some really cool stuff. I'm sure there's more down there. I'm not down there much these days, but yeah, I'd like to get back to that sort of opportunity to engage with all those bits and pieces, and admittedly doing so not in a full-time capacity at all. If I made wine again for myself, in such an environment, it would still be very much under the guise of full-time employment with somebody, and then just making literally like 2 barrels a year and going as far gone as I possibly can, as far as like, so the 413 days thing, it's not a hard rule as far as like a numerological ideology or something, as many folks would like to believe. It's literally just a matter of simplicity, that you harvest the fruit, you just stem it, you put it in the barrel, and you leave it there until about a week out from when you're about to get your next batch of fruit. It's just logistics. It's very much, as much as I do have this tremendous fascination with 7 and 3, 413 is not like there's the 4 and the 3, which 7 plus 1 is the, no. It's but yeah, given the opportunity, I definitely don't see. If you asked me in 22, I was done. There was no way that I was coming back to any of this for a variety of the reasons that I mentioned before. Yeah, now that I'm here, it's just kind of one of those things, like the likelihood that I'm not going to engage in something that I've gained proficiency in over 15 years, yeah, probably not. Like opportunities for consultancy, I do consultancy with people who are starting up co-ops at this point. Nothing of like serious paid value. Honestly, that's probably the worst thing about my character, is like I am miserable with money. I love to share information without expecting a tremendous amount of payoff at the end. Putting dollar signs on my knowledge is just really challenging. And oftentimes when I hear about an individual who's gone off and asked other folks that I've known along the way for their information, and their response has been, well, what are you going to pay me to give it? I'm like, call me. I've got it all printed out. I'll send you the emails. Like, I'm not trying to undercut anybody. I just have a general philosophy, and it doesn't really matter whether I'm working with wine or I'm working with music, that I do genuinely believe that if I assist other people for a low cost or no cost on the front end now, and we're both involved in this, maybe not a race, but we're on a journey towards a destination, that through me assisting in some way, shape, or form now, if I need help down the road, that I'll be able to engage in that from them. And by and large, as far as the creative industry goes, and as far as my experience with winemaking stuff goes, that's usually the case. But that's why I left Portland, was because as far as friendship groups go, I just kind of stopped seeing that as being the case. And people getting sucked down, and I'm not trying to diminish their struggle or anything like that, but I just need dependable people in my life when it's necessary,
Let's talk about the music for a second before we let you go here. Tell me about how it has progressed and where your music goes from here.
So wasn't until last year that I started going to Berkeley, basically right off the back end of finally being able to walk again, pretty much. I started sicking myself really deep into spending money here and there with a couple of Portland operations that are teaching Ableton. And then I went and did a retreat in Hawaii for a week and a bit that's doing Ableton certified stuff, and involved with a handful of producers that are kind of in their peak of their game at the moment. And at the back end of that, I kind of realized that there's a common feature inside of, I suppose it's in the winemaking industry as well, but in music, there's a common feature of what's referred to as gatekeeping information. And I'd always thought that the gatekeeping was happening because people had this like secret sauce that they were unwilling to deliver to students because they wanted to figure out, it's kind of like, come to this retreat, we'll give you almost all of it, but you want more, you got to give us more money after the fact, and then we're going to basically carrot you into giving us, $100 a lesson or whatever the heck. What I kind of discovered was that you're talking to people who have been writing music for 20 years, and they just straight up don't know how a compressor works. Like, it's not they're gatekeeping it for the sake of gatekeeping it. What they're actually gatekeeping is the fact that they don't know. Because you don't get money out of somebody by telling you, like, And so that turned around to me going like, you know what? I had heard for so long, like, don't waste your money on going to higher education. You can learn it on YouTube. Well, it's not real. You guys know this going to school. Like, there's such a huge difference from digging around in the dark on YouTube and fishing than there is to going to a structured curriculum that actually has deliverables and like real requirements in order to facilitate actual knowledge being gained. And so after I did a mastering class with someone who's been in the game for over 25 years. He's mastered every single album done by David Bowie, all the way through stuff by Tupac and Britney Spears and Dr. Dre and Lord knows what else. And so I finally understood the mastering process in a real way. I did a mixing class shortly thereafter. I'm currently targeting how to work with Max for Live and room acoustics. I do room acoustic building for budding producers, and I was raised by an audio engineer, and so the passion's always been there. But because I was raised in cinema, like THX and Dolby Sound, that's one of the reasons why like dance music has never really been this like huge target for me. Mm-hmm. It's been far more about like immersive audio stuff, being involved in doing, I do music for art installations in Portland. And then most of the music that I write now is all based around sunrise sets for like closing out events. 7 a.m. on the Sunday as like the last little, piece before we all go home. So where I'm at now is I'm really passionate about education, really passionate about continuing to learn. And I guess that's sort of the mind, body, spirit balance that I'm engaging in, of engaging my mind through the learning process while actively engaging my body through being up here on the mountain and all the things that are wonderful to offer here. Getting back into snowboarding this year has been huge for PT for my leg. And then, like I mentioned before, music has kind of become my god and become my psychedelic and become my thing. I've received the message so many times that realizing it was time to hang up the phone was, a long time coming. And like get back from a weekend like the one I just got back from the other day, and just meet all these. Universe alignment is so strange, and like the sense of ended up parking up behind some folks that now I've just met another student that I'm going to engage in. He's a year and a half into production. He's passionate, and like I'm ready to give him all the resources that he wants, with no real expectation of exchange of finance. The more I educate, the more the money comes without having to ask for it. And like that was one of the hardest things about the wine thing. I'd been told about this by someone I worked with when I was at Grand Moraine, who was the cellar master at the time, and then he previously had been a winemaker at a different KJW brand. And I was always confused, like, why would you go from winemaker back down to cellar master? And he said to me that when you've spent all of your time creating this product and then you have to go out and sell it and you get turned away, he's like, it's just soul wrenching. And at the time I was like, you wimp. But the more I did it, the more I really began to understand, like, yeah, it's horrible. It's a miserable experience to fly out to New York, sit with some of the nerdiest guys about skin contact wine, get taken into the skin contact emporium there. I can't remember what it's called, but this lady's got this really killer skin contact wine bar there. And like everybody's telling you to your face, like, this is so amazing, this is so unique, your story's so unique, I love the crystals, I love the vibe, I love the Ouija board planchette. And then like you come back and there's no phone call. And you follow up and it's yeah, and then nothing. And I've experienced it with fine dining restaurants in Portland. I've experienced it with all sorts of folks. And, at the end of the day, the biggest proponents of Demeus, hands down to this point, is Post Familiar. Brent is such a tremendous character, and like his ability and his connections to really shake what I've done if I was still making booze, I would almost try to go into contract with them directly just to be able to keep making things for them, because I can't do it like that. I can't keep submitting myself to dismissal and then still feel empowered about wanting to go forward and do it. Mostly because I don't want to live in a world of fuck you. I don't think it's healthy for me or healthy for anybody. Yeah. The music, though, as a result of having never really done mixing and mastering stuff, I'm sitting on like 15 years of content that, not to say all of it I'm trying to get released out to the world. There's loads of it on SoundCloud, but as far as like if you try to find me on Spotify, Omnico Audio, check that shit out. No. But if you try to find it on Spotify, I've got like one song out there that was released. It's a remix I did for somebody else a number of years ago. The reason for that is because I just kept finding it's like, it's not ready yet. What is it that's not there? And now I know what's not there. And now I have to hem and haw and weigh the balance of, do I go back and mix and master all this stuff that I'm sitting on because it's already done? Or do I just take a new step forward and just write from scratch? Because there's only so much lipstick you can put on a pig. And then at the same time, you know, or like the other analogy is like, do I go back and try to re-batter a whole bunch of cakes that have been effectively made, or do I just bake a cake from scratch? So the artist dilemma continues, and I don't really have a real answer for where it's at right now. What I've slowly discovered more recently is that there are ways for me to repurpose stuff that I have written really passionately to create something new. And so it's kind of weighing the balance between the two.
One last question for you.
Yeah, what's up?
You mentioned earlier that when you had Demeus, you poured wine in some very interesting places. So tell us a story about pouring wine in a very interesting place.
I suppose like one of the more interesting places, aside from, I mean, locally, Alt Wine Fest is such a really unique opportunity to go and engage with what's going on inside of the Willamette and Oregon diaspora that's not just Pinot Noir. I really love what they're up to and the way that they've carried through with trying to support, they're not just trying to support local people, they're trying to open people's minds up to the alternative of what's going on. Tangentially to that, out in Maryland, we went and poured out at basically an alt wine fest of some description, out at a vineyard that's name escapes me at the moment. But that was super fun. I think honestly the most interesting tasting that I poured at was at Vino Veritas, where I simultaneously would be, and I did this at Alt Wine as well, but that was the first time that I was reading tarot to each of the people that would come and taste the wine, but in a very cheeky fashion. So I would have my tarot deck, and like tarot is a really fun thing to play with people's psyche, because a lot of people are like, ooh, what is this? And a lot of people are like, oh no, I don't want to touch that at all. And so, you know, toyfully play with people like, hey, like, come on, you know, just take a card. And get folks to take a card and be like, they look at it, I'm like, what do you see? And they're like, I don't know, what is it? And I'm just like, I don't know. And I think that's kind of all encompassing to the way that I approach a lot of the things that I do, be it with the music that I make or be it with the wine that I'm making. I'm not trying to tell you what it is. I'm not trying to tell you. I'm more than happy to tell you the story of how I got here, but like, you know, I classically remember going to this winery down in Napa that, oh God, I don't want to name their name even if I could remember it, but their family, they're old family friends. And we go down there, and like one of the reasons I never worked in Napa is because I hate Cabernet Sauvignon. Methoxypyrazine and I, even though I worked in New Zealand and Sauvignon Blanc land for a long time, I'm just not a huge fan of methoxypyrazine. And the nature of how it exhibits itself in the Napa Valley scene is like a lot of different various types of capsicum or green bell pepper. Sometimes it's like really robust and like fresh. Older stuff can be what I only determine is like overcooked canned capsicum. And I just, ugh. But I remember at the end of this tasting, and honestly numerous tastings in Napa, the classic line at the end was like, so which one's your favorite? And I'm just sitting there like, honestly, your winemaker is very clearly well-versed in the style that they're doing. But I think all of these are disgusting. And people hate that so much. And like, I'm not doing it to be rude. I'm doing it to be honest, because what kind of question is like, which one's your favorite? The question is which one are you going to buy, right? And it's entrainment, and I get it. But I also think the industry, I think the world needs people like us. They need people to turn around and be like, none of it. And to be honest about it, you know? It's not about trying to ruin someone's day. It's just a matter to shake up the box a little bit. But yeah, down the road, most certainly, over and over again, I will choose to repeatedly set up my tastings with the 14-pound slabs of quartz crystal that I'm fermenting my booze on, and a stack of tarot cards next to it, while I'm like, you know, people are looking for tasting notes, and I'm offering you the King of Cups. Like, you know, this is what it tastes like. I think that confusion is such an underrated value to create the question is to create the investment from the person who's consuming what you're doing. Because the question will lead the individual to curiosity far quicker than someone just being told. So this is full of apricots, peaches, and, you know, ripe nectarine. Reminds me of the Alsatian Pinot Gris that I had in 1992. Yay. But that's just my take, you know. And I think that it's important for all of us to have our own take. As ever classically told by my dad growing up, it takes all sorts to make the world go round. Just make sure you're not taking advantage of anybody else while you're doing it. Make sure you're not trying to hurt anybody while you're making it happen.
All the questions I have. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover you wanted to cover today?
Not really.
All right.
Put more rocks in your wine.
Thank you so much for taking the time, sharing this beautiful place with us, sharing your wholly unique story with us.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Cool.